Number one, Ibble Dibble here. We're back and we're bitching. So in part one of this review, I outlined Megan's effortful reframing of the word bitch from anything extremely tedious to literally any woman on the planet simply asking for something she needs. A reach so far, it took her about 10 iterations to get there. My question is, do you think Megan is even smart enough to construct her rhetoric in this way, or do you think some diabolical editor did this for her? The third guest on the pod, and the real big hitter, is Melody Hobson, and as usual, Megan completely fumbles the intro.
But that's what happens when we label someone. A lot of times it's tied to the very women who have power and agency, who aren't comfortable being silent, like businesswomen and entrepreneurs.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you, friend?
Melody is too kind. After an intro like that, I definitely would have gone with, hey, bitch.
You can't talk about drive, determination, and perseverance, especially for an American businesswoman, without talking about Melody Hobson. I mean, who else starts out as an intern at an investment firm and rises through the ranks, becoming president and co-CEO?
Literally everyone that ever becomes president and co-CEO of an investment bank. Where do you think this career track starts, Megs? You go to a top school, study econ or stats or both, get a summer internship at one of the big investment banks in Manhattan, and start climbing. It's like climbing a mountain in the Himalayas. Of your cohort, very few will summit, but there are only a couple routes to climb the mountain, and everybody climbs it the same way.
Let's be clear, her accolades don't end there. She's been spotlighted on seemingly more lists than you can count, including Time's 2015 Time 100 list and the Forbes 2020 list of the world's 100 most powerful women.
I hate the way Megan acknowledges fake awards and media listicles as true accolades. You do have to be a sufficient performer to get on these lists, but they're really pay for play. A lot of people who could be on these lists and win these awards don't even participate in getting themselves nominated and filling out the pursuant paperwork because they simply don't care. So they chat for a bit about Melody growing up poor and therefore really emotionally and practically needing rather than wanting to master finance, and realizing at a very young age that she could take the initiative to do so. I have to give it to Melody. She really tries to school Megan in the nicest possible ways. And I don't know that Megan was able to pick up anything Melody put down. For example,
when you're not this, 11 or 12-year-old and you're growing into a woman, that same understanding of knowing what you want, asking for what you need, that can sometimes be thrown back in your face. Like, so you're being difficult or something, pushy. So for you, you grow up, you graduate from Princeton, you get into the business world. Did you feel like you needed to change your behavior or your way of doing things?
I was taught really early on in business that people act in their own self-interest. And so in advocating for what you want or need, you have to help them to see why it's in their best interest too.
This is taking me right back to when we both did a New York Times Deal Book Summit back in 2021. And when we were talking about advancing women's equality, one of the things I remember that you had said, it stuck with me, is this quote from The Art of War. Was that what it was?
Yeah, Crouch to Conquer.
Haha, Melody knew exactly which part of Sun Tzu would resonate with Megan.
And that has stayed with me so much, that idea.
So many jokes to be made here about curtsying, squatting, kneeling, getting on all fours to conquer. But I'll leave that to your imagination.
Tell people, I do believe sometimes you have to be small to be very big. You are making the choice. Someone's not making you small. You are, I see it in myself. Sometimes I modulate.
I love how Melody talks about how she modulates for her audience, which she's clearly doing for Megan.
I was on a board with someone once, years and years and years ago, and the person, it was a giant figure. And every single time I talked to him, if we were standing on one side of the room and I started talking, I would find he would back up And by the time our conversation was over, we were on the other side of the room.
What?
It's like I'm shouting at him or my hair is on fire. He's like backing up. He's physically showing me how uncomfortable he is. So I get to New York one day and I'm checking into a hotel and he's in the lobby.
Okay.
And I'm like, I'm going to try something different. We see each other. He says hello and I start whispering. Hi, how are you? So good to see you. And so he like leans in. And I'm like, he's like, how long are you in town? I'm like, oh, I'm just here for a couple days. I've just got some work to do. And so he sits, he leans in a little more. And he's like, Melody, sit with me. The mere fact that he said, sit with me, my tone, I'm still me. But it was like, I just whispered. I just tried it. I was like, I just want to see, is there another approach for this person? Because this person I could learn a lot from.
This whisper to old men to get them to lean in and trust you is an old Jackie O trick. Everyone in New York knows this. But of course, Megan has to ignore this relevant, immediately applicable advice and try to put 1,000 of her own twisted words in Melody's mouth.
So it's just the persona or the idea of it by standing in your authority can somehow feel uncomfortable or threatening to people, to the point that I think as women, we find these ways to, I don't know, show up, as you say, in a different way, like by whispering almost brings them in. Or even on, I had the Angry Black Woman episode with Issa Rae, and she talked about how she uses question qualifiers. Like what she's saying isn't good enough, so she has offer a plan B, a different option. And I do the same thing sometimes with my intonation going up on a statement as though it's a question. These things that, I don't know, do you find that you fall into traps or patterns of behavior like that as well?
And again, Melody is so gracious. I would have hit her with the ice cold bitchy. Come again?
I have a whole theory around questions. So questions are non-threatening. Statements are very threatening to most people. And so I actually have a whole process. When I'm going to a board meeting, I work to think of really original questions before I get there. Because I find a lot of people try to hear themselves talk, so they try to show how smart they are, and they do that through statements. But I've actually found it's received better, and it's more interesting when you ask a really great question. It's never the first question, it's the follow-up. So you got to be ready for that, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to steer someone where you want them without telling them. Most of the time people, their eyebrows go up like, well, that's a really good question, as opposed to she put me on the spot and dressed me down over this issue.
Melody, she's a lost cause. This is her 9th episode. You're like her 20th guest, and she's getting worse, not better.
Do you think that men have to think in those terms as well?
I don't think I have to. I choose to. So
you choose
I choose to.
And for a man in a position of power, I think it's just, frankly, it's accepted and glorified and
expected.
Yeah, it's expected for him to have a strong point of view and to come in with strong statements, and it's not questioned that it would be any other way. But
I want to be clear about something, Megan, though. Like, anyone who's worked with me, anyone who knows me, I am not a shrinking violet. Like, I have strong opinions about things. That's actually part of what I have to sometimes overcome, because I can come in so hot. Not hot mad, but a heat-seeking missile on an issue. Right. And then that stifles all of the conversation. So I'm aware of that aspect of myself.
Melody, you tried. This bitch is a Harvard Business School case study in how resistant a narcissistic CEO can be to mentorship. So Megan says they were talking about curiosity, but doesn't feature a single word of that conversation. She just awkwardly segues into,
curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought her back.
Well, that makes me want to die. This has got to be the most cringe thing she said so far on the whole podcast. It's out of nowhere. It's unrelated. It's about cats, not dogs. And I can only imagine it being said to her in a sexual scenario. Am I wrong for thinking that? Am I being a bitch? Next, because Megan doesn't know the difference between etymology and pedantry, She invites a journalist to help her unearth why female dogs are called bitches.
But why are female dogs called by that name? I knew there had to be more to the story, and as I shared with you at the beginning of this episode, I love etymology.
If she's in the habit of loving things but ignoring or abusing them anyway, I fear for her husband and children.
Etymologists believe that the word bitch kind of came out of this Greek insult that meant women were dogs in heat begging for men. That was the idea. And there was a more modern definition that was written down in the 1890s. And bitch was an appellation that was the worst name you could call an English woman, even worse than a whore. So it was sort of codified as this way of degrading women by saying that they were hypersexual, but also it sort of took away this idea that they were goddesses. So it took away this sort of divine power and replaced it with a degrading kind of sexuality.
This is just incorrect. Bitch comes from the Old English biche, which in turn comes from the Old Norse bikja, both meaning female dog. It entered Old French as biche, also via Old Norse, and was therefore solidified as the name for female dogs after the Norman conquest. As far as it becoming a gendered pejorative, there's no evidence that this Proto-Germanic word for a female dog collided with the Greek usage of their own word, skuda, for a female dog, and as an insult towards women and men at any point. This assumption has been made by authors who point to the 15th century usage of bitch as a pejorative in the Chester mystery plays, which were written at the same time the Byzantine Empire was dissolving and the Greek translation movement was resultantly accelerating. Honestly, the Greeks needn't have had anything to do with it for the word to become a pejorative. After all, the phenomenon of female dogs in heat having little energy, lots of aggression, and exhibiting risky behaviors in order to mate is universal. A bitch by any other name, no?
The punishment for women earning more degrees, entering the workforce, delaying marriage, and having children was sort of a mass campaign of what I call bitchification. So whenever women showed up in public in headlines, they were discredited as different kinds of bitches. Every woman, whether she was in politics or Hollywood or sports, she was bitchified by the 24-hour news cycle.
I'm about Megan's age, and this does not resonate with me. I don't remember the bitchification of working women. If you are somewhat older than me, can you please let me know if this was even a real thing? As I mentioned in the last video, at this time, bitch was a censored word on TV. Is this bullshit?
The treatment of them used various archetypes, derivatives, corollaries, and actually the word bitch to, sort of undercut their personas and to bitchify them.
Yikes. Is she purposefully pandering to Megan with this very sketchy use of the word archetype? Because there's no such thing as an archetypical bitch. The Jungian archetypes are the innocent, everyman, hero, outlaw, explorer, creator, ruler, magician, lover, caregiver, jester, and sage. Archetypes are not gender specific, though for cultural reasons, caregiver, lover, innocent, creator are more frequently associated with females, but certainly none correlate to bitch. Of course, if you Google archetypes, you can find any variety of New Age BuzzFeed list you might be looking to quote. Is that what this author does? Like Megan, rewrite history to suit her narrative? Bitch is kind of an archetype, the way the word kind of came from the Greeks. And Megan, give her an inch, she'll take a mile.
That's what I'm thinking about. I mean, maybe that's part of why I have such a visceral reaction to this word. Because it was kind of implanted on a granular level without any of us thinking about it at the time. And so these stereotypes that were lurking beneath the surface of these characterizations, they just became ingrained in us.
You know what I'm having a visceral reaction to? The phrase implanted on a granular level. Ew. It's revolting. Far more so than bitch. Can we do a listener poll? Which do you think is more disgusting? When Megan uses connective tissue, metaphorically, or when Meghan uses the phrase implant on a granular level. Also, how boldly insulting to her listeners that she assumes we're all robots who intake stereotypes from TV and then spit them right back out at her. Absolutely not. Being aware of stereotypes is different from believing in them or acting on them. And for someone who loves to hear herself talk and see herself in print, she's constantly trying to demonize the media, and that's incredibly dangerous to the value and culture of free speech in a liberal society. When you scroll through the news section of the Archewell website, they've made 30 posts over the past year, 7 of which concern Meghan's war on the free press. In other words, just shy of a quarter of their posts have titles like The Internet Lie Machine, Prince Harry and Aspen Commission colleagues release much anticipated report on misinformation crisis, Archewell and NAACP pursue a new era for digital civil rights, investing in a better world online. Archewell congratulates youth activism movement to design a safer internet, and improving online safety for young people everywhere. I'm not saying all of these initiatives are bad. I'm saying Meghan has a transparent agenda to stop people criticizing her. The final guest on the pod is Victoria Jackson, a seemingly very lovely woman who got extremely rich selling cosmetics on the home shopping channels. Meghan introduces her in her usual absurd manner.
And she turned this company into a massively profitable entity. I mean, we're talking more than 600 products, over $1 billion in sales. Just, it's incredible what she created.
Side note, I truly wish people would stop acting like successfully mass marketing shit to people who don't need it is the pinnacle of human achievement.
And you can imagine, as a woman, introducing something like this, as she faced some serious pushback.
Have you never heard of Mary Kay, Estee Lauder, Helena Rubinstein, your local Avon lady? They broach a couple of topics, the first being Victoria's horrific rape as a teenager, and the second, her pouring $70 million of her own money into clinical research to try and find a cure for a disease her daughter has. I think Meghan gives her, and she accepts, too much credit for funding scientific research. She did not learn molecular biology or immunology on the fly. She did not direct research. She was just pitched again and again by scientists who knew what they were doing and knew the next best steps, and she asked them to work together, prioritize, and proceed. No one was turning away a woman with $70 million and perhaps connections to other donors. I don't doubt Victoria actively fostered collaboration, but it was mostly the money and the focus that forced progress and would have in hands other than Victoria's. Also, like Melody, I love hearing from her, but what does this have to do with the word bitch? Meghan's afraid to bring it up. So in closing, Meghan drops the B word altogether and just acts as if we've been talking about the word difficult this entire time.
I mean, I was just chatting with my girlfriends recently, and I was asking them for the show, what are the sort of archetypes you think we should discuss? And almost immediately, unequivocally, they all jump to difficult. That's the word. You have to talk about difficult. They said it gets thrown around so casually now.
And then she tells us the lesson we're supposed to get out of this podcast, because honestly, if she didn't, we wouldn't know, would we?
The goal can't be for everyone to like you, but the goal can be for them to respect you.
Newsflash. You can't force people to do either. There are people who understand and value respect, and people who don't and never will. Some lingering portion of the world no doubt still believes women inherently deserve less respect than men, but whether it's a sexist or a jerk or an idiot, you can't force them to respect you. All you can do is give respect and expect it in return. When it's not given or insufficiently given, you have 3 choices: endure due to urgent circumstances beyond your control, demand respect and put explicit guidelines in place for its delivery, or part ways with disrespectful company. It seems obvious that anyone of Meghan's age who has climbed so far has done all 3 at different points in her life. So why does Meghan act like someone who has never had a job just watched a couple corporate HR training videos. The last thing I want to do today is share a personal anecdote from my undergrad years. Every day at lunchtime, reruns of the previous night's episodes of Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune were playing. It was just always on the TV in the dining hall. Most of us would compete with the show, just having fun, telling jokes, low pressure, low stakes conversation. But on occasion, there was that one person who, perhaps coincidentally, but I have a feeling, in a pathetic, immature effort to fit in, actually watched the original airing of the shows and then tried to show off at lunchtime like they were actually so much more knowledgeable than the rest of us 19-year-olds. And they always thought they were really getting away with it, and we always let it slide. That, to me, is who Megan is in the world. She always thinks she's getting away with it. She thinks she's so sneaky. She thinks she's winning our admiration and adulation, when really we're letting it slide. Mostly because we can't be bothered, perhaps a bit because we feel bad for her. That's it for today. Like, share, and subscribe. Toodles!